Hello, Om Shanti. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tuesday evening talk. Today's topic is being bold and affirming without arrogance. It is also rephrased for tonight as affirming appropriately. Today's speaker is Sister Denise Lawrence, who has been with us for last few weeks, an author, TV program producer, Raj Yoga meditator. We have been benefiting from her sharings, practical wisdom, spiritual knowledge, and how to blend them together. So we look forward to hearing very, very insightful thoughts which we can apply in our lives and make our relationships better. So over to you, Sister Denise.
And good evening, everyone. When we take up this word bold and affirming and arrogance, it immediately makes us aware who is being asked to be bold and affirming without arrogance. Certainly, the world we live in, wherever you may be on this planet, the world we live in is not egalitarian in so many ways, so that those who are the dominant ones do not need to affirm themselves. They're already affirmed by the prevailing social attitudes. They're already born into a circumstance where it is assumed that they will affirm themselves, that everyone will recognize them, and that they will take a dominant position, and they will not be accused of arrogance if they are in a dominant mentality. And so they don't really need to be invited to affirm or be bold or not be arrogant. So who is being addressed here? We're talking about, in a very general way, anyone who finds themselves as a minority. You could be a minority from the point of view of religion, that the dominant religion is something different from yours. So you'd be a minority from religion point of view. You could be a minority in terms of culture. You could be a minority in terms of race, orientation, in political orientation, gender orientation. You could be a minority in terms of your learning style. Even somebody who is left-handed would be considered by the majority of right-handed people to be somehow lacking in capability and value because of being left-handed. And all of this is in the culture, the prevailing culture, which has decided that certain characteristics are good. And if you happen to fall in those characteristics, then you can be comfortably bold and affirm yourself because everybody else will expect that from you. and that even if you are arrogant, you will not be called out about it. But if you are a minority of any type, then this can be leveled against you. And it also is leveled against women in general, even though women are not a minority. I think it's fairly much the case that there are a little bit more women than men, but women are nevertheless considered in a general way to be similar to those who are minorities, those who are assumed to be less than. And so this is the group of people, the very, very large and diverse group of people to whom this is being addressed. And there are, of course, many men who are in a minority because of their orientation, because of their style, because of many things. And so there is a kind of stereotype that is out there in the culture that says this kind of guy is what should be, and anyone who's not like that, they are somehow less than. And so therefore they need to affirm themselves in order to function on any kind of equal footing. And we live in a world where we talk a lot and hear a lot about equality, but we don't really, I think we don't really have complete clarity about equality, because equality doesn't mean everybody's the same, because that would be quite boring. And you don't want to be identical to the next person. But you want there to be a level playing field. I think this is what we're talking about. But it isn't a level playing field. Many, many people, the odds are stacked against them. And so therefore, they will be, from childhood, they will receive social conditioning to make sure that they stay that way. And if they don't receive that social conditioning, then there isn't any need to be bold or affirm yourself or worry about being called arrogant, because it doesn't come up unless there is this conditioning. And so I also need to talk a little bit about the conditioning and where it comes from. And mostly this is there across the world, regardless of your faith tradition, regardless of whether you are living in a country that is a republic or a monarchy or a theocracy, or there's many different systems of government that are out there. But the majority of countries tend to be republics. And in these countries, it talks a lot about equality. So there's a principle of equality, but the practicalities are that it isn't like that. There are pecking orders, there are hierarchies, there are social attitudes which are institutionalized in the education system, the social system, the financial system, the legal system, all of these systems which have been there for a long, long time. How long has this been going on? Well, according to me, I think that we're looking at something like 1,000 years, give or take a few hundred. So what happened 1,000 years ago to put all this in place? And if you go back in history, and I remember many, many years ago thinking, let me see if I can take a look at recorded history. How far does it take me back? And having been raised in England, I thought, well, I have best access to this kind of information from the land where I am living. And I found that recorded history went back to 600 years after Christ. And before that, there wasn't anything. And there was a long gap of a good 500 or 600 years. And then there was the Roman Empire. But what happened in between the end of the Roman Empire and the beginning of recorded history in the British Isles and maybe other parts of Europe as well is what they call the Dark Ages. And nobody knows what went on at that time. They're called Dark Ages because there's no record, or very little record, of what happened then, what was going on. And then recorded history started up. In other parts of the world, a recorded history goes back much further. But here we are in the United States, and it is a country where the immigration into the United States came mostly from different parts of Europe. So that kind of culture came. And so this is the legacy that we have here. And who was here before, which we call the First Nations, they are not accorded an equal position. And if a person from the First Nations thought, yeah, let me be bold and affirm myself and not be arrogant, but what would happen is the odds are stacked against, and it's a very rare one who has been able to establish themselves in this social and political environment and still connect to the First Nations culture. And that is very, very difficult because the odds are seriously stacked against it. And this is because of history, mostly because of prejudice. And the other group, which is a very big minority here in the United States, are people who came from Africa as slaves, and then the slavery was outlawed. And then there was something called slave wages, where, if you're a person of color, it was not possible to be considered according to your talent or your quality as a human being, because people looked at you in terms of your skin, in terms of the social attitudes, and so on. And like that, many different communities here, whether it is from China or other parts of the Southeast Asia, or whether it is from India or wherever, but if you're from something other than the dominant group, then there is a big, long process of having to be bold because you will face so many obstacles, and to affirm yourself in the face of so much opposition, violent opposition, and to establish yourself takes time. And this has not been resolved because of the way the society is set up. And what is the solution to this? So many people have tried so many ways to resolve this, and it steadfastly refuses to get resolved. And I think the problem is a perception. You are trained from childhood to perceive in a certain way, and if you go against that, you will be in trouble. And so I think that it's also very important to take a look at those who are part of the dominant majority and yet who do not subscribe to attitudes that keep minorities in a subordinate or subservient or lesser position. And I think the question of women is quite important because within the minorities, the women are also given a lower position, just as they are in the dominant majority. So the position of women in regard to all this is in a way common, whether you're in the dominant majority or in a minority, any minority. And this is because the world as we know it is predominantly patriarchal, whether it refers to the majority or the minorities. There are a few matriarchies, but very few, and they are very off-piste, as it were. They're not mainstream by any means, but they're there and they're very successful. But it's not approved, it's not considered good, and successes of women are downplayed, substantially downplayed. And so it is a very non-egalitarian society. And so let me also take up another area where there is a dominant angle of view and then a minority. And that is to do with spirituality, which is really my subject, because I'm not really looking at these things from a sociological or political angle, but my greatest interest is in the spiritual perspective. And spirituality is also an area where there is a minority, and the majority is materialist. And then there are very, very different angles of vision on what reality is, what a person is, what's right and wrong, what is appropriate, how to run the world, etc., etc. And the culture that we live in is materialist. And it is based on sense pleasure, pleasure-pain principles. It is based on the traditional Abrahamic religions, the Judeo-Christian religion, and the culture that was, I think, widely put into effect and codified during Victorian times. And in Victorian times, especially women and children were considered objects and to be treated as such. And then the religion also identified people as sinners. And spirituality gives a very, very different angle on your identity, which I think is quite key and crucial when we're thinking about this question of affirming oneself. Because, first of all, what is a self? Fundamental question. And it doesn't really matter whether you are in the dominant majority or any of the minorities, or if you're in the body of a woman or the body of a child or the body of a man, because people identify you according to your body. And if you look at your ID, it doesn't say anything about your soul. It says only your photograph, and it gives your date of birth, and it gives your nationality and your race and your color of eyes and your weight, your color of hair. And that is what you are, something like this, and then your gender. So the sense of identity that is widely considered is that you are what it says on your ID card. Whereas spirituality says, well, that will tell you a fair bit about my body, but it won't tell you anything at all about me. So then people will go to your biodata, your curriculum vitae, and there you will see the educational background, your phone number, your address, your email, your bank account, your hobbies, your career path, your accomplishments, which are financially remunerative, and if you've done any social service, any volunteer work, that will be on there too. So it says a little bit more than your ID card, but it doesn't say much about who you are as a being. And so we cannot really expect this world to take into consideration who people are, because there's no way that anyone is educated or raised to be able to perceive who someone is. But what makes a person valuable is what their motivations are. And so in my ruminations and ponderings, I came to the conclusion, I don't know if it's right or not, but I came to the conclusion that a person who is motivated by love for the divine, higher power, God, the supreme being, supreme intelligence, truth, this kind of thing, on one hand, and also by love for humanity. So a person who's motivated by these two things is a very, very high quality being. And this is a person who's motivated by the kind of intentions that cause circumstances to be favorable, not only for themselves, but for everyone else as well. And if you compare that to the angle of vision of the typical materialist approach to this, You have this expression, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is the American motto: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So life means that you do not leave your body, that you stay alive in this body. And liberty is that you can do what you want, and that you're limited only by your talents. And then the pursuit of happiness means that you can try to get as much money as possible, find a very nice life partner, have some children, have a nice house, good transportation, nice holidays, this type of thing. So this is called life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But from the spiritual angle, you would look at it differently. And you would say, well, you know, I am motivated by love for humanity. And that means all of humanity, not just a few people, but the whole of humanity as a totality, with all the different cultures and religions and ways of being. Because these are human beings. And so you give importance to the human person. And you make sure that what you do is not going to damage a human person just so that you can enrich yourself at that one's expense. So that would not be called love for humanity. And you're also motivated by love for truth, love for God, love for higher principles, higher energy, the divine, something which is greater than a human being. Because a human being, as you know, we all have our shortcomings. We have good qualities and we have weaknesses, bad qualities. This is the nature of the human being. But nevertheless, that doesn't give you the right to look upon another human being as fundamentally less than you. They may be different, but not really fundamentally less than you. They may be less fortunate than you, but that doesn't make them less valid as a human being. And so it's a very, very different approach. And I think also what is of interest to me from the spiritual approach is there's a different relationship with the planet. And at the moment, so many people are very concerned about climate change or damage to the planet and planetary systems due to human intervention, human overuse. And you know, one of our big problems in this is that there is a very, very, very big human population. And, you know, there are sayings like there's enough for people's need, but not enough for people's greed, which lets you know that when you are going according to the principles of materialism, then your pursuit of happiness may constitute someone else's deprivation. And so different groups of people are in conflict with each other over who has more and who has less. And so you get a lot of people who really need to and want to be bold and affirm, and they don't feel the need to be arrogant particularly, but they will get shot down or silenced or disappeared or something like this And so there is a great deal of sorrow, a great deal of pain. And there is also a mounting feeling of the need to get even, the need to take revenge, the need to say, my rights have been so violated and I have been reduced to such an extent that I will do anything at any price to assert and affirm myself. And there you get really endless and severe conflict. So we are actually at a time when we have created a setup for a terrible conflict, conflict between men and women, conflict between the races, conflict between the planet and the people, conflict between the North and the South, the East and the West. It's a very, very polarized world, which is very much ready to tear itself apart. And so now, what does a person do, regardless of their situation, whether they're in the minority or in the majority? Because these threats that are looming are going to affect everyone, majority, minority, whatever. There's no way to avoid it. And then comes this question of arrogance. And I think that those who are in privileged positions for whatever reason and take advantage of their privileges to denude the earth, the oceans, the skies of their natural tendency to provide endlessly for the benefit of humanity. All this has been kind of wasted. And so we can't say that there's anything else other than arrogance that made that happen. When you put yourself over others and say, I am great because of this, that, and the other, and you are low because of certain reasons, and therefore I will mistreat you because you're secondary. So the mistreatment is arrogance. And people want to redress the balance. They want to make it right. But looking at the circumstances, and you say, so many people have tried, and yet the circumstances are no better. Maybe a little better in some areas, but overall not better. So then let's come to just an individual person, maybe in the context of your family, because there are many different cosmoses, you can say. There's the microcosm of a single individual and the macrocosm of the whole universe. And in between, there are different levels. And the quantum of humanity is one single person. And one single person is part spirit and part matter. That's just the nature of the thing. We are embodied spirits, or we are spiritual beings expressing ourselves through physical bodies. But mostly people don't identify themselves like that. People usually say, I'm a body, and somewhere around I probably have a soul somewhere, maybe. Well, that means there's an imbalance. where the consciousness of the body is fully the majority, the dominant, and the spirit is very much given second place. And so this is already an imbalance. I think what this subject is about fundamentally is balance. And why does it say we should do this without arrogance? It's an odd statement to say that being bold and affirming without arrogance, because it assumes that if you're bold and affirming, it's automatically arrogant. And it's true that it's often considered to be that. But if you tell yourself, well, I don't want anybody to think that I'm arrogant, then what that means is that you will be less bold than you should be, less affirming than you should be, and you'll still be considered arrogant. So that actually probably won't work. I think arrogant has to do with when a person is reactive more than proactive. I think it's more like that. Because when you are reacting to being mistreated, you actually put yourself in a weak position. And in order to actually get somewhere, you have to really bring yourself into a very powerful position. Think of your position in your family. A family is anyway by nature hierarchical. You have the head of the household, who is usually the father figure of a household, and then everyone else is lower than him, and he is the ruler, and he decides what the rules are, and he gives punishment to those who go against his rules. So he's in a position of power. Sometimes the head of the household is not the father, but mostly it is. But one of the things that we do have is a situation where I think the majority of families are broken families, divorce and second marriages, and so the institution of marriage has lost its way, and it's been very difficult for people to establish themselves in meaningful family relationships as the majority. This is the minority now. It used to be the majority. Now it's the minority, which means it's another sign of the fabric of society systematically tearing itself apart. And people who grow up in these situations of fragmentation and conflict within the family, this is called a dysfunctional family. And so no one really knows how to function in a functional way when you grow up dysfunctionally. And so that's a very important thing to put on the agenda that needs to be put right, but it's not necessarily at the top of the agenda of the dominant gathering who run the world. There are different items on the agenda, but yet in that situation, how do you find yourself? I think that's the first thing. You don't know who you are. You have people who you grew up with who couldn't guide you adequately. You made your way and did your best, but you don't really know enough about life, about humanity, about what it is to be in a functional circumstance. And so it fragments, and this is normal. Therefore, you may be boldly saying, okay, this is me, I affirm myself, I find my place, but you wouldn't really know whether you were being arrogant or not. And so it's also quite difficult to really say, okay, what does it look like if you're bold and affirming and not arrogant? Not too many forms of that are visible, because usually in order to be successful, you have to be bold and affirming and arrogant. And if you're not arrogant, then you won't be able to be bold enough or affirming enough, because you're in a highly competitive world. And also, you may be spiritually weak. I think that if a person is spiritually powerful, they can be strong and affirming. They don't really need to be bold, and they don't need to be arrogant, because they're in their power and they know who they are. But it takes a while to get to that point. So you have to be quite an experienced human being to move from a relatively dysfunctional condition where your sense of identity is out of balance, to reach this stage of balance and wisdom and spiritual empowerment and so on. And so this is why in the practice of Raj Yoga that we do in the Brahma Kumaris school or university, it becomes a lifelong process to start off whenever you start off, and slowly, slowly you learn about yourself, you build up yourself, and gradually you become really true to yourself. And this is something that is really an internal piece of work. And it may have a bearing on your situation, your professional situation, your social situation, but more than anything, it's an internal process, and you find yourself up against many challenges, and you gradually learn and you empower yourself to be able to handle the challenges that come your way. And in that way, you make your life balanced and integrated. And this is a kind of success that is very real, but it's not necessarily measurable by financial success, or you won't necessarily become famous or anything that would get a lot of notice in the world. But in your own sphere, you achieve a very solid state from maybe a very fragmented state. So I will stop there, and we have a few minutes, and if anybody would like to ask any questions in the chat, you can write it down. And Kalyani is going to let me know what your questions are. So can you see the questions? And you might have to raise up the volume on my speaker so I can hear you. Yeah, great. Thank you.
So there are no questions till now. Wait,
Maybe you have some questions.
right now I got to go again.
Well, what we can do, because I raised a lot of points, let us just turn within for a moment to have a few minutes in contemplation, meditation on the spiritual side of yourself. And the spirit is the spirit within. And so you're thinking about this inner aspect of yourself, thinking about being internally in your power. What does that mean? Because this is the first stage of being able to affirm yourself. But to affirm yourself, you need to be really connected with the self. So what am I? Who am I? This is the question. And the self, the I, is a spirit, a being of light. You have a body, could be male, could be female, could be old, could be young, could be dark, could be fair. There's all sorts of different types of bodies. But the spirit within is light. The light of the soul, also called the spark of life. So think of yourself as this light, like a star in the sky, a light which is intelligent, conscious, which has feelings, which is peaceful and loving, and which comes into action through the body. Your body is your medium of expression. It's not yourself. And making this shift is a shift from thinking, I am this body, to thinking, no, I'm not this body. I work through this body. I experience the world through my sense perceptions. I am not my eyes, but I see you through my eyes. So the self is that beautiful, imperishable light, which is immortal. We call it the soul, the immortal soul. That's me. That's the self. And everyone is a soul. So when you're talking to another human being, it's a soul talking to a soul through a body. And you see, souls are invisible, but you can detect the being of another person. You can detect, who is this, very subtly. But when you look at the body, you look at the physical identification, you can't see the soul. So meditation is a study as well as a practice to see the soul, to relate soul to soul, to see right through a person's face and make contact with their soul, to feel a person's heart. to touch a person's mind with your mind. It's another way of being. And when you can do that very naturally, very easily, you never need to be arrogant. You just be who you are in your power. You don't need to hold yourself back. You express yourself. This is me. I am a being. This is my communication, my contribution to the conversation. A being communicates with other beings. And the most powerful instrument in this is thought. Souls think, and thoughts become physical expressions. You go from the subtle to the material and back again to the subtle. This is life, the material side and the spiritual side working together in balance.
If lack of boldness comes from insecurity, how can we feel more confident?
A lack of boldness doesn't only come from insecurity. Ask yourself, where does insecurity come from? And if you analyze it deeply and go all the way back, it comes to conditioning. Some people feel very secure. Why do they feel secure? Because they have people around them who are predictable, reliable, who give them positive feedback, structure, boundaries, and so they understand where the limits are. They understand that they have protectors, and they learn how to take care of themselves as they are taken care of. And so then insecurity doesn't arise, but you wouldn't feel insecure unless you had very good reason to be insecure. And that is if you are not taken care of from childhood onwards, if you experience different kinds of traumas, if you grew up in a war zone, if you grew up in a dysfunctional family, if you grew up being told you're not okay, all these are forms of conditioning which result in a feeling of insecurity, so that if you find yourself telling yourself, I feel insecure, you need to understand that that was a consequence of many things that you experienced, which resulted in that feeling of insecurity, and that you have the possibility to neutralize those. And so the inner work that is done in a spiritual practice will address the issue of insecurity to a point where you start to feel secure in yourself. This idea of coming into your power is very important. When you know that you're a spiritual being and that you have value just because you exist, and that you are imperishable because a soul cannot be destroyed, and you start to really study yourself as a spiritual being, the reasons for being insecure get challenged. And you have to identify exactly what makes me feel insecure. And is it real? And if so, how real? And if it's not real, then you need to set about deconstructing the illusion of insecurity. Because in the feeling of insecurity is in many ways illusory. I mean, the fact is, anyone could die anytime, but since you're immortal, it's not really the end of the world, because when you die, your body dies, but you don't. There's continuity. So you don't need to be afraid of death. Some people feel insecure because of a possibility of rejection. And when you develop yourself spiritually, you actually realize that you're not actually dependent on whether somebody accepts you or rejects you. It's not really your problem, it's their problem. And gradually you start to build yourself up to what you actually are and realize that the reality of yourself had been reduced by your life experiences, your conditioning. So you're restoring yourself to what you actually are. And then this sense of insecurity will be brought into proper perspective. But it takes time because you have built up this feeling of insecurity over a long, long period of time. And it's not your fault. It's not anybody's fault. The world we live in is designed that way. If people felt secure, they wouldn't worry about all the things that you have to insure yourself about. But the feeling of insecurity is not the same as the fact that nothing is absolutely reliable, but how you feel about it, that is something you do have quite a bit of possibility to work with.
Second question is, recently you spoke about the importance of standing up for yourself in the face of societal customs that induce us to believe that we should not do so in various circumstances. What is the best way to stand up for oneself in the best way?
Standing up for yourself is, I think, also somewhere where this word arrogance can be quite relevant, because sometimes when you stand up for yourself, you become confrontational. And if you confront people, they react a lot about that because they feel put upon, they feel insulted, they feel aggressed. And so when you're standing up for yourself, it has to be balanced with an approach which is non-confrontational. So you have to practice and really think about, okay, what exactly do you want to accomplish? What do you want to say? What do you want people to hear? What are they doing to you such that you don't stand up for yourself? And also look at your conditioning, how you have been conditioned to not stand up for yourself. And then think of this idea of the world as a theater. And there are many acting schools. I used to live in Hollywood, so there were lots and lots of people were actors. And to be an actor, you have to go to acting school. And there are very, very good things that people learn. You have a situation and you have to play a character. Now, you can do this even with yourself. You say to yourself, okay, I'm this character who is in a situation and I don't stand up for myself. And the director is saying, okay, here's the situation. Normally you don't stand up for yourself, but now play the role of somebody who does stand up for yourself. And you can be quite successful by experimenting with this. You can even get some friends together with you and practice standing up for yourself around particular issues where you tend to hold yourself back and not stand up for yourself. And the reason is always going to be because you've been trained to do that. And it's about untraining yourself. And that means practice doing it differently. And you can experiment, or you can write it, or you can make a cartoon. There's endless ways of trying out different ways to stand up for yourself in circumstances where normally you don't, and to really put yourself in those situations in your mind, or go back in your mind to a situation where you didn't stand up for yourself and you wanted to, but you couldn't, or you were afraid to, or you didn't know what to do. And just play that scene again and again in your mind, and play yourself standing up for yourself in different formats. And that will give you some very good insights about yourself. Because these situations come up every so often, again and again, so that you can try out your experiments, and you will actually find that you get quite good results by doing that. It's about taking a risk, take a risk to be who you are. And even if the sky falls down on your head, doesn't matter, probably won't. But even if it did, it's okay.